ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Tech Showdown. My name is Kevin, this is my co-host Teddy, and today I'm putting the Intel i7 8086K, which comes in this little fancy box here, up against the Ryzen 7 2700X. So these are both very powerful CPUs. The 8086K, I must say, caught me off guard. It really did. I really didn't think Intel would be releasing a CPU like this, and we'll talk a bit more about that at the very end of the video. But for right now, let's go over the specs of these two CPUs. So the i7 8086 I should say, is a 6-core, 12-thread, 14nm Coffee Lake CPU, coming in with a 4 GHz base clock and a 5 GHz turbo clock. It's also fully unlocked. So this is the first Intel CPU that runs at 5 GHz out of the box. Of course, AMD have done this already way back when they had the FX 9590. So yeah, this is Intel's first 5 GHz CPU, you know, as far as out of the box goes. But for the most part, it's just an 8700K with slightly higher clock speeds, both on the base and on the boost. Now, the Ryzen 7 2700X is an 8-core, 16-thread Zen Plus 12nm Ryzen CPU with a 3.7 GHz base clock and a 4.3 GHz turbo clock. It is also fully unlocked. Now let's talk about the test rigs then. So for the AMD Test Rig, I use the MSI X470 Gaming Pro Carbon motherboard, which is a very solid motherboard. And for the Intel Test Rig, I use the MSI Z370 Gaming Pro Carbon. So I use the same motherboards for the AMD Test Rig and the Intel Test Rig, just to try and make it as fair as possible. Now, as far as the memory goes, so we have some G.Skill 3400 megahertz DDR4 memory, a 16 gigabyte kit, so that's very good there. Both were tested with the MSI GTX 1080 Ti, the Gaming X, and both were tested with Arctic's Freezer 33 air cooler, so that's just a little 120mm air cooler. So let's talk about the overclocking and the temperatures then. So the 2700X comes with a pretty good stock clock speed for a Ryzen CPU anyway. So this guy will boost up to 4.35 gigahertz. That's pretty respectable. However, as far as overclocking goes, you can't really do much with it. My one manages to do about 4.2 gigahertz on all cores. What that means is that it actually runs slower if you overclock it in certain things, especially things like games, which really can leverage that high boost speed, or higher boost speed I should say. So it's not very good in that aspect. It is good if you look at it from the perspective of you don't really need to overclock the CPU as it runs at a pretty good frequency straight out of the box for an 8-core CPU anyway. Now the 8086K, as we've previously said, goes up to 5 gigahertz. It's very impressive, you know, that's some serious speed. Now, as far as overclocking goes, a lot of people were talking about this. They were saying, oh, so the 8086K is going to be like, you know, this great overclocker. So I did test this with some good cooling, with a liquid cooler, and it doesn't overclock any better than my 8700K. Now, that may be just my case of the CPU I got. This is a retail one from Playtech. But I'm not entirely sure. So they both do about 5.1 gigahertz. So yeah, but there seems a lot of variance. A lot of people 8700Ks get ones that only do like 4.9. Other people will get ones that do 5 gigahertz. That's very common. This is all cores I'm talking about as well. And then people get ones that do 5.1, and there's quite a few of them out there as well. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's anything abnormal. I'd say maybe at best you'd call it uncommon, and that's all I have to say about that. Now, as far as temperatures go, I tested this with IDA64, doing their CPU stress test for 5 minutes, and as you guys can see, the good old 8086 still gets pretty damn hot. The 2700X is a much cooler running CPU by comparison. So let's jump into the benchmarks and see how these two CPUs perform. So as I said before, the 2700X will just be shown running at its stock speeds because overclocking actually kind of takes the results the wrong way, goes the other way. It doesn't actually add performance. And we'll show the 8086. So this was overclocked with the 120mm air cooler, but because of that, I couldn't take it above 4.9 gigahertz. As you previously just saw with the temperatures, it gets pretty hot. I can't take it above that with a 120mm air cooler. So I'll just show it with what it did at 4.9 gigahertz. So let's jump into the benchmarks and see which one comes out on top. And we're back. So what do we make of the benchmarks then? Well, the 8086 here, it basically does like 1 or 2 FPS better than an 8700K in most of the gaming benchmarks, with the exception of Rainbow Six Siege. But of course the numbers there were much higher, and it was getting like 5 FPS better at 1080p. But it's pretty much what we all expected. It's like 1 or 2 FPS difference over the 8700K. You honestly would never notice that in a game. So there's no noticeable difference running an 8086K than an 8700K. Trust me as well. Like, I ran this for a week or two in my rig after using my 8700K. I didn't notice any difference at all between them. Honestly, I didn't. So yeah, pretty much no difference than an 8700K for the 8086, but it's still a very powerful CPU. There's no two ways about it, guys. They put up some serious numbers, as you guys saw. Now the 2700X does a good job, but you see that even though it's got 8 cores, its clock speed disadvantage really does tie it down. This is where heaps of us as tech reviewers have been really wanting AMD to step up. I mean, if you could, like, Ryzen 3 when that comes out, I mean, if it can do like 4.7 gigahertz, 4.8, something like that, it's just gonna shred. Like, it's gonna be so powerful. But right now, the disadvantage is still in the clock speed, and you do see that in the benchmarks, and that's why, in terms of who wins, it has to go to the 8086K. And even though it's only by 1 or 2 FPS, this is the fastest gaming CPU you can get right now, as far as all the CPUs I've ever tested recently. Even though it's only 1 or 2 FPS better than an 8700K, it still is better. Which brings us now to the conclusion. What do I make of these two CPUs, and which one should you buy? So let's bring price into it. And if you head over to playtech.co.nz, you'll see that the good old Intel i7 8086K is going for a whopping 695 New Zealand dollars. Okay. 695 New Zealand dollars is ridiculous. There's no two ways about it, guys. That is just insane. Now, the 2700X is going for 509 New Zealand dollars. So the 2700X is almost 200 New Zealand dollars cheaper than the 8086K. Not only that, the 2700X is coming with a very good stock cooler, the Wraith Prism. A very, very good stock cooler, whereas you don't get one with the 8086K. So that means you're going to have to go out and buy one of those. You're going to have to get at least a 120mm air cooler. The 2700X also has a better upgrade path going forward. So that's a big factor for a lot of people out there. What else is there? Oh, the motherboards will be cheaper as well eventually. The B450s, once they come out, will mean that you could run the 2700X with one of those just fine, and obviously that will bring the total cost down a bit as well, whereas the 8086K, you're going to have to stick with the good old Z370 for this guy to be worth it. And so overall, when you look at it that way, in terms of how much it actually costs you as the user all up, it's going to probably cost you about half as much to go for the 2700X, especially once the B450s have come out. So I have to give it to the 2700X. Sure, the 8086K might be faster, but it's just too expensive. That's ridiculous. Nearly 700 New Zealand dollars. I just can't believe it. So yeah, this showdown, I would definitely give it to the 2700X, and if I had to buy either of these CPUs using my own money, you can bet I would be picking the 2700X. So before I round out this video, I was just going to touch on something, which is, if we think back, if you guys have been into PC tech for a while, you'll remember when the FX 9590 came out, and everybody laughed. They thought it was the biggest show. 220 watt TDP. I mean, it was a 5 gigahertz, 8 core AMD CPU, but it was just like, it was just stupid, and nobody bought it, and it was a very sort of pointless CPU. Now, as far as everyone laughing at it, it's sort of funny that I was thinking about this, because it seems like it's come full circle. Because now Intel has put out a 5 gigahertz CPU, which is just a rehash, which the 9590 was as well. It was just a rehash, like the FX 8350. And this is just a rehash of the 8700K, which itself is a rehash on top of a rehash, if you really think about it. And it's just a pointless CPU. I guess for collectors, they might like it the same way collectors maybe liked the 9590. But aside from that, in the real world, for real users like you and I, it just has no real place to me, honestly. Anyone that's serious about getting their CPU up to 5 gigahertz will just buy an 8700K, whack on a good cooler. There you go, 5 gigahertz. You don't even need to go with an 8700K, but if you wanted 6-core 12 thread, then you could just do that. So a very pointless CPU, and I don't really understand why Intel even released it. But maybe that's just me. So let me know in the comment section down below, which one of these CPUs would you pick and why? And do you understand why Intel released this CPU? Because if you do, please tell me, because I really don't understand it, except to create like marketing hype and headlines and maybe get a few extra sales out of some, 8700Ks, basically. That's all I think it is. Now, I thank you guys for watching this video. Please subscribe to Tech Showdown if you haven't already, and enter my full gaming PC giveaway. Just check my channel, you'll find that video, because you definitely want to enter that to win a full gaming PC. And I'll see you guys next time.